Welcome to Save Us from Hell, a podcast about the United Nations. I am your co-host, Mark Leon Goldberg. I'm a journalist who's covered the UN for nearly 20 years. I'm also the founder and proprietor of Global Dispatches, and this is a project of Global Dispatches.
And I'm Anjali Dayal. I'm an author and an associate professor of international politics at Fordham University in New York. I teach and do research and write about the United Nations.
So, Anjali, the Olympics are upcoming in Paris. Exciting. I love the Olympics. I've worked from home for over 20 years, and the only time I ever turn the TV on during the day is during the Olympics. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. I love an Olympics also.
And it's, an important time for the United Nations as well. People may not know, but there are some important intersections between the UN and the Olympics. The first is the calling for a formal Olympic truce. This idea, this tradition that goes back to the, days of ancient Greeks, but was revived in the early 1990s. You have this tradition where the General Assembly, the president of the General Assembly, in fact, formally calls for an Olympic truce. And you often also have the Secretary General issuing a statement calling for an Olympic truce. Now, these comments and these invocations often go unheeded. I don't think you're going to see a laying down of arms for formally, it's 7 days before the Olympics start to 7 days after. And in fact, there are two recent Olympics that preceded the outbreak of really major armed conflict. There was the 2008 Olympics in Beijing, which shortly after that ended, you saw the Russian-Georgian War. And then, of course, there was the 22 Beijing Olympics again, which preceded the Russian invasion of Ukraine by a couple days. So, hopefully the calmer heads will prevail after the Paris Olympics, but you never know.
Yeah, you never do know. It's funny because, to some extent, the Olympics and the UN reflect a similar idea about the world, right? They're expressions of a national world, right? Where the primary political organization in the world is the nation state, but within a cooperative framework, right? So what do? We organize along national lines, but what do we do along those national lines? We try to excel and we try and cooperate, right? And so there are these very deeply late 19th century, early 20th century ideas about the way the world should look. Um, and they have varying degrees of success in expressing their ideals, but the ideals are really similar in some ways.
And I would say the exception to that rule is an innovation in who gets to participate in the Olympics that was championed by the UN Refugee Agency. So this will be the third Olympics in a row in which there is a distinct team of refugees. It is the Refugee Olympic Teams, and there are over 30 athletes competing in a variety of different sports who are not of any nation, but are registered refugees with the UN Refugee Agency and will be competing alongside, Americans, Indians, Chinese, Japanese, but under their own distinct flag.
I think it's the 2016 Olympics, right? Is the first debut of Team Refugee in Rio. And then they competed in Tokyo as well, and they'll compete in Paris, and then again in Dakar in 2026. So that's already in the cards, right? And they're selected by the IOC's executive board, but they're supported by Olympic scholarships for refugee athletes. And as you said, right, they have to be recognized as refugees in their home country. And then they coordinate with the they're hosted by the 15 Olympic committees around the world that host refugees.
And this whole idea of a refugee Olympic team was really inspired and public imagination was drawn to it through the story of Yusra Mardini and her sister. These were two teenage Syrian refugees who were expert swimmers who in the process of fleeing Syria. Their boat in the Mediterranean, got stranded, ran out of gas, engine failed. They hopped into the water and swam the boat safely to shore. And it was like that story that I think captured public imagination and got people around the UN and the International Olympic Committee thinking that they ought to do things to support people like Yusra Mardini and demonstrate the kind of number one, just like highlight the important role that refugees play in society, highlight the fact that these are exceptional, like 30 individuals among a growing and massive refugee population, and draw attention to the cause of refugees more general.
Yeah, and the idea being, something like that act of pulling a boat to shore, right? That is an Olympic feat, right? Like that is a superhuman thing to have done. And to be a refugee is so hard. What it takes, the extraordinary strength it takes to persevere, survive, and make it through these different processes, right? That is a feat as remarkable as anything Olympic athletes do. And when we think about, what Olympic athletes are doing, right? Like that sort of like set of feats of strength is also subject to a lot of chance. So much is out of the control of people who are operating at this level and within these kinds of different structural pressures. We just don't usually think of it that way, right? And in that sense, right, making sure that there is someone there to represent the more than 100 million displaced people around the world is an important innovation, right? Important entry into the policy debate, and to say, like, look, refugees are extraordinary people.
Well, the refugee team has not medaled yet
Mhm.
in any of the Olympics that they've participated in. I'll be rooting for them.
Me too. And I have to say, like, um, big Muppet fan. I was really excited in 2016 because Sesame Street had a hashtag Team Refugee drive, right? Where, like, if you were watching Sesame Street, you could join in sort of rooting for Team Refugee and building out a basis of support for these athletes. So if you work at Sesame Street and you are listening, let's get Grover on this again, please.
Let's do it.
Yeah,
Grover has an open invitation to save us from hell. There are a lot of insights we can glean from Grover.
I would die. I would die if we got Grover on this podcast.
Let's make it happen.